The sergeant said, "She's just a recruit," until she took command of the entire drill. That was the core of it, the moment boiled down to its essence. Sergeant Elias Vance watched the woman cross the sun-bleached expanse of the parade ground at Fort Kestrel, and the words slipped out, a dismissive murmur to the corporal beside him. "Some admin transfer. Bet she requested high desert for the dry air." The corporal chuckled, but Vance's eyes remained fixed on her. She was older, maybe 50, with threads of silver woven into the dark hair pulled back in a severe regulation bun. Her uniform was crisp but generic, devoid of the patches and commendations that told a soldier's story. She moved with an unnerving economy, her feet landing precisely on the cracked asphalt, her arms held still at her sides. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. She wasn't striding. She was flowing, a river of quiet purpose in a landscape of sharp angles and shouted commands. Vance, a man who had spent 20 years reading the language of bodies under stress, saw something that didn't fit the narrative of a paper pusher. He saw a coiled spring where there should have been slack. Fort Kestrel was a place for beginnings and endings. Young soldiers arrived with soft hands and wide eyes to be hardened by the unforgiving Mojave sun. Old sergeants came to wind down their careers, their joints aching with the memory of colder wars and wetter jungles. Anya Sharma fit neither category. Her file, which Vance had glanced at out of idle curiosity, was a ghost. It listed a name, a social security number, and a single line. Administrative specialist, transfer from inactive reserve, no history, no previous postings, no commendations, no disciplinary actions. It was a file designed to say nothing, which in the army was a statement in itself. Anya felt Vance's eyes on her. She didn't look, didn't acknowledge the scrutiny. She had grown accustomed to it in the week since her arrival. She was an anomaly, a gray stone in a box of polished brass casings. The young recruits, buzzing with nervous energy, saw a matronly figure, someone's mother misplaced in a uniform. The career NCOs saw a bureaucratic dead end, a problem shuffled from one desk to another until it landed here, in the dust. She was assigned to the base archives, a mausoleum of paper records in the sublevel of the command building, a place where careers went to be forgotten. The irony was not lost on her. She catalogued the ghosts of past missions while trying to become one herself. As she reached the cool shadow of the command building, she paused, her head tilting almost imperceptibly. Her senses, honed over decades of practice, were not dulled by the quiet. They were sharpened by it. She could smell the ozone from the humming server farms mixing with the scent of floor wax and stale coffee. She could hear the rhythmic clatter of keyboards, the distant, percussive pop-pop-pop of a rifle range, the squeak of a cart's wheel 2 corridors away. She noted the position of the surveillance cameras, their fields of view, the slight blind spot near the fire extinguisher. Her mind mapped the building not as a workspace but as a structure, a tactical problem. It was an old habit, one she had failed to retire along with the rest of her life. She was just a recruit, an administrative clerk. She repeated the words to herself, a mantra of self-effacement. But the part of her that had survived frozen nights in nameless mountains and frantic escapes through hostile cities refused to believe it. Colonel Madsen's office was a shrine to his own career. The walls were a carefully curated exhibition of achievement. Framed citations, photographs of him shaking hands with generals, a captured enemy banner mounted behind his oversized oak desk. He was a man in his late 40s, fit and sharp, with the predatory stillness of a hawk. He believed in forward momentum, in aggression, in the visceral superiority of the American soldier. He looked at Anya Sharma, standing perfectly still before his desk, and saw only an obstacle, a piece of administrative grit in the finely tuned machine of his command. He tapped a manicured finger on the thin folder in front of him. Sharma. The name was flat, impersonal. Your file is sparse. He let the word hang in the air-conditioned silence. It says you have administrative experience. That's a broad term. He leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. Let me be clear. Fort Kestrel is the tip of the spear for unconventional warfare training. We are shaping the next generation of warfighters. This is not a retirement home. This is not a place for people to fade away. The condescension was a palpable force, designed to diminish, to put her in her place. He wanted a reaction. A flinch, a stammer, some sign that she understood her own insignificance in his world. He got nothing. Anya's face remained a placid mask. Her eyes, a deep and steady brown, met his without defiance and without subservience. They simply were. "I understand, sir," she said. Her voice was calm, pitched low, another surprise. It held a resonance that didn't match her unassuming appearance. "My assignment is to the archives. I am to digitize the mission logs from Operation Desert Saber forward." He was momentarily thrown by her lack of reaction. He had expected to have to spell out her lowly position, to make her feel the weight of his disappointment in inheriting her. Instead, she had stated her duties with the clarity of a mission briefing. It irritated him. "That's right," he snapped, recovering. "Miles of paper, decades of it. It's a tedious, solitary job. You'll be in the sublevel. Out of sight, out of the way." The message was clear. "Go to your basement and be invisible. See that it gets done. I don't want to hear from you or about you. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." Still that unnerving calm. It was like talking to a stone. He wanted to provoke her, to see a flicker of the person behind the placid exterior. "You look a little old for the uniform, Sharma. Did you lose a bet?" She didn't even blink. Her gaze did not waver. "The uniform still fits, sir." The simple statement held no insolence, yet it felt like a perfectly executed parry. It was a fact stated as a fact. It deflected his jab and left him with nothing. He was used to soldiers who were either eager to please or cowed by his rank. This woman was neither. She was an equation he couldn't solve. Frustrated, he waved a hand, a gesture of abrupt dismissal. "Get out. Go to your basement." Anya performed a crisp, economical about-face and walked out of the office. The door clicked shut behind her with quiet finality. Colonel Madsen stared at the closed door for a long moment. He felt an unfamiliar prickle of unease. He had intended to put her firmly in her box, but he was left with the distinct impression that he had just been neatly and efficiently managed. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. She was a clerk, a nobody. She would go to her basement and be buried under an avalanche of paper, and he would never have to think about her again. The archives were exactly as advertised. A cold, cavernous space in the belly of the command building. Rows of towering metal shelves stretched into the gloom, burdened with thousands of cardboard boxes, each one a tombstone for a forgotten operation. The air was thick with the smell of decaying paper and dust, a scent of stagnant time. A single high window, barred and grimy, let in a sliver of muted desert light. For anyone else, it would have been a sentence to solitary confinement. For Anya, it was a sanctuary. The quiet was a balm. The solitude was a shield. She began her work with methodical precision. She set up the industrial scanner, calibrated its sensors, and established a digital filing system more logical and efficient than the one outlined in the directive. Her hands, which many dismissed as old, moved with the grace and certainty of a surgeon. She handled the brittle pages of after-action reports and intelligence summaries with a delicate touch. But her mind was a razor. She wasn't just scanning documents. She was absorbing them. The names, dates, and coordinates were meaningless to her, but the patterns were not. She saw tactics that failed, communication breakdowns, logistical shortfalls. She read between the lines of redacted text, her experience filling in the blanks. And from her subterranean vantage point, she watched the living base. The grimy window looked out onto the edge of the main training grounds. It offered a limited, ground-level view, but it was enough. She would work for hours, her body still, her focus absolute. Then she would rise and stand by the window, observing the drills. She watched the recruits practice squad movements, their actions clumsy and full of tells. She saw their hesitation, the way their eyes darted everywhere and nowhere, the slight tremor in their hands as they chambered around. She saw Private Tanaka, a young soldier with a quick smile and a desperate eagerness to please. He was fast and motivated, but he consistently forgot to check his 6, leaving himself open. He ran with his head up, an easy target. She saw Sergeant Vance bellowing corrections, his frustration a raw, visible thing. He was a good NCO, she could tell. He cared. But he was trying to teach a dozen things at once, and the recruits were overwhelmed, retaining nothing. She would stand there, her mind running its own simulation. She'd mentally reposition a fire team to create overlapping fields of fire. She'd adjust a soldier's stance, lowering his center of gravity. She would map the flow of the exercise, identifying the choke points, the dead zones in communication, the predictable avenues of approach the instructors always used. She wasn't judging. She was analyzing. It was an instinct, a fundamental part of her being, like breathing. One afternoon, while Vance was running a react-to-contact drill, she watched Tanaka's squad get pinned down by simulated machine gun fire. They bunched up behind a single concrete barrier, a perfect grenade target. Vance was screaming at them to disperse, but they were frozen by the noise and the pressure. Anya's eyes narrowed. From her perspective, she could see a shallow ditch just 10 meters to their left, offering superior cover and a flanking route. None of them saw it. They were focused on the threat, not the terrain. She traced the path in her mind. Low crawl, 3 seconds of exposure, then safe. It was simple. It was basic. And they were all going to fail the evaluation because they couldn't see it. She turned away from the window, her face impassive, and returned to her scanner. The brittle page of a 20-year-old supply manifest crinkled under her fingers. The mistakes of the past, the mistakes of the present. The patterns were always the same. Only the names changed. The pressure began as a flicker. On the main operations floor, 2 stories above Anya's archive, the lights over the primary tactical display blinked once, twice, then stabilized. Colonel Madsen, observing a large-scale base defense drill from the glass-walled command center, didn't notice. His focus was on the dozens of screens showing camera feeds from all over Fort Kestrel. Today's exercise was his pet project, a complex simulation codenamed Iron Shield. It involved every soldier on the base, a sophisticated network of sensors and automated opfer systems, turrets that fired blanks, speakers that blasted the sounds of incoming artillery, and drones that projected holographic enemy combatants. It was designed to be the ultimate test, a crucible of chaos. And chaos was what he got. The initial flicker was a symptom of a deeper sickness in the system. A sudden, violent gust of wind from a microburst that morning had kicked up a cloud of fine, abrasive sand. The sand had infiltrated an exterior network junction, causing a short. The short triggered a cascade failure in the simulation's core programming. The logic that governed the automated aggressors began to loop, then corrupt. On the training ground, the carefully scripted exercise devolved into a nightmare. A turret designed to fire suppressive bursts in one direction swiveled and began firing erratically across a wide arc, pinning down 2 squads of recruits. The holographic enemies, which were supposed to depawn after being hit, instead multiplied, flooding the field with shimmering, intangible targets that confused and overwhelmed the soldiers. Comms, which were routed through the same damaged network, dissolved into a cacophony of static and garbled, overlapping voices. Panic, cold and sharp, began to spread. The recruits, already on edge, broke. Their training evaporated. They scrambled for any cover they could find, their movements frantic and disorganized. Junior officers, unable to communicate with their teams or with command, shouted orders that no one could hear or follow. In the command center, the atmosphere curdled from controlled tension to outright alarm. "What the hell is happening?" Madsen demanded, his voice tight. "Get me comms. Shut down the turrets." An analyst, his face pale, stabbed at a keyboard. "I can't, sir. The system is not responding to shutdown commands. It's a closed loop. We're locked out." "Then cut the power to the grid," Madsen roared. "Sir, that would disable the entire base network. The infirmary, the perimeter security, everything. It's all on the same primary circuit." Another technician replied, his voice trembling slightly. On the main screen, Madsen watched Sergeant Vance trying to rally a group of terrified soldiers, his commands swallowed by the simulated weapons fire and the rising wind. He was a lone point of order in a sea of chaos, but he was being submerged. The drill was no longer a test. It was a genuine hazard. The blank-firing turrets could still cause burns or serious eye injuries at close range. The panic itself was a danger, risking trampling and accidents. Madsen felt a knot of cold dread tighten in his stomach. His perfect, controlled exercise had spun out of his grasp. He was in command, but he had no control. He watched his soldiers, his responsibility, flailing in a storm of his own creation, and for the first time in a long time, he had no idea what to do. Down in the archive, the world trembled. The lights flickered violently, then settled into a sickly, brown-toned dimness. The steady hum of the building's ventilation system faltered, replaced by an erratic groan. Anya Sharma did not flinch. She simply lifted her head, her senses on high alert. It was the quality of the sound that told her something was wrong. It wasn't a simple power outage. The discordant symphony of the bass, the distant shouts, the rhythmic pop of training rounds, the hum of machinery, had been replaced by a chaotic, arrhythmic din. It was the sound of a system breaking. She rose from her chair and walked to the door of the archive, her movements unhurried. The corridor outside was empty, the emergency lights casting long, distorted shadows. She could feel the vibrations through the soles of her boots, a low-frequency thrumming that spoke of malfunctioning hardware. She walked not toward the chaos, but parallel to it, her path guided by an internal map of the facility she had been building since her arrival. No one stopped her. The few personnel she passed were either running towards the command center or staring at flickering monitors, their faces tight with anxiety. She was just a piece of the background, an older woman in a plain uniform, invisible. She emerged into the blinding desert sun through a side maintenance exit, the door hissing open and then shut behind her. The parade ground was a scene of pandemonium. Soldiers were scattered, hugging the ground behind inadequate cover. The air was thick with dust and the relentless, deafening chatter of the automated turrets. Anya's eyes swept the scene, not as a bystander, but as a diagnostician. She saw the looping patterns of the turrets, the terrified faces of the recruits, the futile efforts of the NCOs. Her gaze landed on Sergeant Vance, who was trying to pull a panicked private to safety. Her eyes then tracked back to the source of the problem. It wasn't the turrets themselves. It was the system controlling them. While the officers in the command center were trying to solve the problem from the top down, Anya knew that complex systems often have simpler, physical failsafes. She had seen it on the base schematics she'd committed to memory, a document she wasn't supposed to have access to, but which had been misfiled in a box of mess hall menus from 1998. Her steps were calm and deliberate as she moved along the edge of the building, away from the main chaos. She headed towards an old, rust-streaked utility junction box near the perimeter fence, a piece of infrastructure so old and forgotten that it was covered in weeds. To everyone else, it was just part of the landscape. To Anya, it was the key. She knelt before the weathered metal panel, her fingers finding the concealed latch immediately. She pulled it open. Inside was a tangle of wires and antiquated-looking circuit breakers. It was the manual override for the entire training grid's physical hardware, a relic from before everything was integrated into the main network. Her hands moved with a speed and precision that defied her age. It wasn't the frantic stabbing of a panicked technician. It was the deft, confident work of a master craftsman. She didn't just pull the main breaker. That would be crude. That would be a simple shutdown. She began to manipulate the circuit relays, a series of quick, rhythmic flicks of the switches. She was listening, feeling the feedback through the panel, sensing the changes in the system's rhythm. She wasn't killing it. She was seizing control of it. She was taking command of the chaos itself. From his vantage point on the command center balcony, Colonel Madsen watched the field through a pair of powerful binoculars, his knuckles white. The situation was deteriorating. Then something changed. The change was subtle at first. One of the turrets that had been firing wildly suddenly fell silent. A moment later, another one, which had been pinning down Tanaka's squad, fired a single short, controlled burst not at the soldiers, but at the ground 10 feet to their right. The recruits flinched, but the impacts kicked up dust that clearly delineated the path to the shallow ditch Anya had noted earlier. It was a command, a direction. Then another turret fell silent. Then another. The cacophony began to subside, replaced by a structured, deliberate sequence. The holographic enemies flickered and vanished, not all at once, but in waves, clearing sectors of the field systematically. The comms in Madsen's earpiece, which had been a wall of static, suddenly cleared. A single open channel crackled to life, clean and silent. On the ground, the recruits, their ears ringing, slowly lifted their heads. The oppressive, overwhelming noise was gone. The field was eerily quiet, save for the whistling of the wind. They looked around, confused but breathing sighs of relief. Sergeant Vance, who had just managed to get his small group behind better cover, stood up slowly. He looked across the now silent training ground, his eyes searching for the cause. And he saw her. He saw the older woman, the admin clerk, kneeling by a forgotten junction box near the fence line. Her hand was resting on a large, red lever, her posture one of serene control. She looked up, and for a brief second, her eyes met his across the dusty expanse. In that moment, Vance's perception of her underwent a seismic shift. The dismissive thought, "She's just a recruit," evaporated, replaced by a profound and unsettling question. "Who are you?" Private Tanaka, who had been cowering in a ditch, realized that the terrifying burst of fire that had sent him scrambling for cover hadn't been random. It had been a shepherd's crook, nudging him away from a position of exposure and into one of safety. He followed the gaze of his sergeant and saw the woman. He'd seen her around, the quiet lady from the archives. He saw her stand up, close the panel on the junction box with a quiet click, and turn to walk back toward the command building as if she had just been out for a stroll. The entire event, from the moment she intervened to the restoration of order, had taken less than 90 seconds. In the command center, the technicians stared at their screens in disbelief. "Sir," one of them said, his voice full of awe, "the system, it's rebooting, but it's a controlled, phased sequence. I've never seen a diagnostic protocol like this. It's not just shutting down. It's purging the corrupted code and re-establishing the network layer by layer." Madsen lowered his binoculars, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. He had seen her walk to the box. He had seen the chaos resolve itself with an impossible, elegant logic. He didn't understand the technical details, but he understood command. And what he had just seen was a masterclass in it. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't panicked. She had diagnosed, moved, and acted with a chilling efficiency that made his own frantic yelling in the control room feel like the tantrum of a child. He turned from the balcony and strode back into the operations room. "Find her," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get her in my office. Now." The condescension was gone. In its place was a sharp, predatory curiosity. Colonel Madsen stood behind his desk, forgoing the authority of his chair. Anya stood before him in the exact same spot as before. The power dynamic in the room, however, had been irrevocably altered. "What was that?" Madsen's question was a blade. "Explain it to me." Anya's expression was unreadable. The simulation's logic controller entered a recursive loop, likely triggered by a hardware fault, she stated. Her tone is neutral, as if she were reading a weather report. The system was trying to correct errors by compounding them. "I didn't shut it down. I interrupted the loop at the physical relay level and introduced a sequential shutdown command through the manual diagnostic port. The system's own feedback protocols then executed the shutdown in an orderly fashion." She used simple words, but the concepts were dense, the understanding behind them profound. She spoke of the base's complex network as if it were a simple circuit she had wired herself. Madsen stared at her, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He understood perhaps half of what she said, but he understood the implication perfectly. She hadn't just gotten lucky. She had displayed an intimate and expert knowledge of a system she should not have had any access to or understanding of. "The schematics for that manual override are classified," Madsen said, his voice low. "They are not part of the general base orientation. They were misfiled." Anya replied without inflection. In a box labeled See Ration Menus, 1998 to 2000, I was organizing the inventory. The sheer improbability of it was infuriating. And yet, he knew she was telling the truth. It was exactly the kind of bureaucratic sloppiness that occurred on a large base. But she hadn't just found them. She had memorized them, understood them. Madsen was a man who dealt in threats and force. He didn't know how to handle this quiet, immovable competence. He couldn't bully it. He couldn't dismiss it. So he decided to test it, to push it until it broke, or until it revealed its true nature. You see flaws, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the window overlooking the training ground. I can see it in your eyes. You stand in your basement and you judge my soldiers, my methods. He stepped around the desk, circling her like a shark. Fine. You think our security is flawed. You think our protocols are weak. Show me. He stopped in front of her, his face inches from hers. There is a red cell exercise scheduled for 2,200 hours tomorrow. The objective is to infiltrate this building, bypass all security layers, and plant a marker in this office. No team, not even from special forces, has ever succeeded. The exercise is considered unwinnable. A lesson in humility. He paused, letting the weight of the challenge settle. I'm giving you command of the red cell. Pick your team. Show me what you can do. He expected her to refuse, or to assemble a team of the best soldiers on the base. He expected a negotiation. Instead, Anya was silent for a moment, her gaze distant, as if she were calculating trajectories and probabilities. Then her eyes focused back on him. I don't need a team, she said softly. I only need one person. Madsen raised an eyebrow. Oh? And who is this one-man army you require? Private Tanaka, she said. I need Private Tanaka. Madsen almost laughed. Tanaka? The eager, clumsy recruit who couldn't remember to check his six? The one she had watched fail drill after drill? It was absurd. It was an insult. But then he looked into her eyes, and he saw no hint of mockery. He saw only cold, clear purpose. He felt a chill trace its way down his spine. This wasn't a joke. It was a move in a game he was only just beginning to understand. Fine, Madsen said, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and intrigue. You get Tanaka. The exercise is a go for 2,200 tomorrow. But Sharma, if you fail, I'll have you transferred to a weather station in Thule. You'll be counting snowflakes for the rest of your career. Anya simply nodded. Understood, sir. The night was moonless, a black velvet cloth studded with the cold, distant diamonds of the desert stars. At 2150, Private Kenji Tanaka stood beside Anya Sharma in the shadow of a derelict supply shed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was terrified. He had been pulled from his bunk by a stern-faced Sergeant Vance, given a set of black fatigues, and told only to report to Sharma and do exactly as she said. Now, he was about to try and break into the most secure building on the base with a woman everyone thought was a filing clerk. Ma'am, he whispered, his voice cracking. I don't know anything about infiltration. I'm gonna mess this up. Anya didn't look at him. Her attention was fixed on the command building, a monolithic block of concrete and light 1,000 meters away. You are not here to know, she said, her voice a low murmur that was barely audible over the wind. You are here to be fast, to be quiet, and to follow instructions without question. I know everything else. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. Tanaka breathed, chastened. Good. When I say move, you move. When I say stop, you stop. When I point, you look. Do not think. Just react in the command center. Now a blue cell defense hub, Colonel Madsen, Sergeant Vance, and a team of security specialists watched a bank of monitors displaying feeds from dozens of thermal and night vision cameras. Perimeter is secure, an analyst reported. Thermal scans show nothing. They're out there, but they're ghosts. Vance stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of intense concentration. He was no longer thinking about the admin clerk. He was thinking about the woman who had tamed a runaway computer system with her bare hands. Madsen paced behind the consoles, a cup of coffee untouched in his hand. "She'll try the ventilation shafts on the roof or the storm drains," he predicted. Standard infiltration doctrine at precisely 2200 hours. Anya touched Tanaka's arm. "Move." They didn't run toward the building. They ran parallel to it, using the deep shadows cast by the outlying structures. Anya's path was a zigzag, moving from one pool of darkness to the next. She moved with a low, fluid gait that Tanaka struggled to emulate. It was a predator's stalk, not a soldier's run. She led him to a section of the perimeter fence that was monitored by 2 overlapping cameras. "She's pinned," the analyst in the command center said smugly. "No way through there without being seen." But Anya wasn't looking at the fence. She was looking at the ground. She pointed. "When the patrol vehicle passes, you have a 4-second window. I need you to dig under the fence. Right here." Tanaka looked at the hard-packed, rocky soil. It was impossible. But then he saw it. A patch where the dirt was slightly looser, where a drainage pipe had been recently excavated and refilled. A detail no one would ever notice. He heard the rumble of the patrol truck. As its headlights swept past, Anya whispered. Now Tanaka clawed at the dirt with a ferocity born of adrenaline. It gave way easily. He slithered under the fence. As he got to his feet on the other side, Anya was already there. She hadn't gone under. Vance, watching on the monitor, zoomed in. He rewound the footage. She had timed the camera's automated sweep perfectly, climbing the 10-foot fence in the 2-second blind spot as the camera panned away and then back. Her movement was a single, seamless flow, utterly silent and impossibly fast. "My God," Vance whispered. They moved from shadow to shadow, bypassing motion sensors by staying close to the ground, the thermal radiation of which masked their heat signatures. Anya led Tanaka to the base of the command building, to a small, unmarked maintenance hatch for the HVAC system. It was secured with a state-of-the-art electronic keypad. "Dead end," Matson said with satisfaction. "That lock requires a randomized 7-digit code that changes every 60 seconds, synced to an atomic clock." Anya placed her hand on the panel, but she didn't touch the keys. She closed her eyes. Tanaka watched, bewildered, as she stood perfectly still for a full minute. Then her hand moved. She entered a 7-digit code with blistering speed. The lock clicked open. In the command center, the security chief's jaw dropped. "Sir, she just entered this minute's code. How in the hell could she know that?" Matson was silent, his face ashen. He was getting a call, an encrypted, high-priority signal coming through on his private line, a line reserved for the Pentagon. He snatched up the receiver. Matson, the voice on the other end, was gravelly, calm, and radiated absolute authority. "Colonel, this is General Cole. I'm looking at a flagged activity report from your base's network that has my personal alert on it. It seems someone just brute forced the access code to your command center's HVAC maintenance port. I only know one person who can do that by feeling the micro-vibrations of the internal tumblers. Tell me, Colonel, do you have a woman named Anya Sharma on your base?" Matson's blood ran cold. He looked at the monitor, at the quiet, older woman slipping silently into the bowels of his fortress. "Yes, General," he managed to say, his own voice sounding distant. "She's here." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Colonel," General Cole said, his voice heavy with something Matson couldn't decipher. Annoyance, perhaps, or weariness. "What, exactly, did you just ask Operator Nix to do?" The name echoed in the silent room. Nix, a ghost, a myth whispered in the halls of intelligence agencies. A name associated with a 3-decade career of deniable operations, of missions so secret they were never officially recorded. Nix, the operative who could walk through walls, who had toppled regimes with a whisper, who had disappeared 5 years ago, presumed retired or dead after a mission in Odessa went sideways. Matson looked at the screen, at the unassuming admin clerk moving through the ventilation shafts with the silent grace of a phantom. "She's not a recruit," he whispered to no one in particular. Vance, who had overheard the name, stared at the screen, his mind finally connecting all the disparate, impossible pieces. The calm, the efficiency, the impossible knowledge. It all made a terrifying kind of sense. On the other end of the line, General Cole sighed. Her file was sanitized to give her a quiet life, Colonel. She chose that archive. She chose to be invisible. For God's sake, man. She wasn't sent to you for war games. She was trying to find some peace. The final door was heavy steel, the last line of defense before the command center itself. It was rigged with pressure plates, laser grids, and a biometric scanner. It was, Colonel Madsen had boasted, as impenetrable as the gate to Cheyenne Mountain. Anya and Tanaka arrived at the door via a cramped service ladder. Tanaka was covered in dust and sweat, his nerves shredded. Anya looked as if she had just walked out of her office. She surveyed the array of security measures, her eyes cataloging each one. The lasers are on a 12-second cycle, she murmured, more to herself than to Tanaka. The pressure plates are keyed to anything over 100 pounds. She looked at Tanaka. You weigh 165. Too heavy. She pointed to a network of overhead pipes. The pipes can hold your weight. You will traverse them to the other side of the door. Do not touch the wall. Tanaka looked at the pipes, then at the 20-foot drop. He swallowed hard, but nodded. He was no longer questioning her. He was an instrument of her will. While Tanaka began his slow, precarious journey across the pipes, Anya turned her attention to the biometric scanner. It was keyed to Colonel Madsen's palm print and his alone. On the monitor in the command center, the security team watched, waiting for the inevitable failure. This is it, the analyst said. There's no way past that. Anya reached into a small pouch on her belt and removed a thin, flexible piece of silicone and a small atomizer. She sprayed the silicone with the atomizer, then carefully pressed it against the scanner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the light on the panel flashed from red to green. The heavy locks on the steel door disengaged with a series of loud, definitive clunks. In the command center, there was a stunned silence. Madsen stared, his face a mask of disbelief. That's impossible, the security chief stammered. That scanner has a pulse and blood flow sensor. A simple print lift shouldn't work. Vance leaned closer to the screen. His eyes narrowed. She didn't lift a print, he said, his voice thick with dawning comprehension. Look at the residue on the scanner. He pointed to a faint, oily smudge. Earlier today, when she was in his office, he circled her, got in her face. He probably put his hand on the desk for balance. Madsen's mind flashed back to the confrontation. He had leaned on his desk, his palm flat against the polished oak, right before dismissing her. She had noted the placement. She had lifted a perfect, three-dimensional impression of his hand from the oil and sweat he'd left behind. The atomizer wasn't for adhesion. It was a chemical compound that mimicked the heat and faint electrical pulse of living tissue. It was a trick that shouldn't exist outside of spy novels. Tanaka dropped to the floor on the other side of the door just as Anya pushed it open. They stepped through the doorway and into the hushed, blue-lit corridor leading to the command center's main room. They had won. They stood before the glass doors of the operations room. Inside, every head was turned towards them. Every face was frozen in a state of shock and awe. Anya made no move to brandish a weapon or declare her victory. She simply pushed the door open and walked in. Tanaka followed a step behind, his posture ramrod straight, feeling as if he were part of a moment that would be told in whispers for years. Anya walked directly to Colonel Madsen's desk. She didn't look at him. She reached into her pocket and placed a single, small object on the polished surface of the desk. It was a challenge coin, old and worn, its markings unfamiliar. On one side was a stylized owl with wide, unblinking eyes. On the other, a single word, Newseye. Nix. She said nothing. She turned and walked toward the exit. The room was utterly silent. Colonel Madsen stared at the coin, then at the back of the woman walking away from him. The arrogance, the pride, the rigid certainty that had defined his entire career crumbled to dust in that moment. As Anya reached the doorway, he reacted. His training, his discipline, the core of his identity as an officer took over. He snapped his heels together, his back ramrod straight, and rendered the sharpest, most heartfelt salute of his life. The sound of his hand striking his brow echoed in the silent room. For a beat, nothing happened. Then, The security chief, a grizzled major, turned and saluted. The analyst at the console stood and saluted. One by one, every person in the room, officers, analysts, technicians, rose to their feet and rendered a salute to the quiet admin clerk who had just dismantled their world. As Anya passed Sergeant Vance, he didn't salute. He simply met her eyes and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of profound, wordless respect from one professional to another. Anya acknowledged it with the barest inclination of her head, and then she was gone, melting back into the shadows of the base, leaving a room full of stunned soldiers and a legend reborn. The sun rose the next morning, painting the desert in hues of orange and pink. It was a new day at Fort Kestrel, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The usual boisterous energy of the morning formation was subdued, replaced by a quiet, watchful tension. When Anya Sharma emerged from her barracks, dressed in her simple, unadorned uniform, a ripple went through the assembled soldiers. Conversations died. Heads turned. The recruits who had once looked through her now saw her, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and reverence. The NCOs who had dismissed her as a paper pusher now straightened their postures as she passed. Their morning greetings of ma'am, once mumbled out of bare politeness, were now crisp, sharp, and imbued with an entirely new meaning. She was no longer invisible. She was the ghost everyone was looking for. She walked her usual path toward the command building, her pace unchanged, her expression as placid as ever. She gave no indication that she was aware of the silent awe that followed her. She was simply a woman walking to work. Outside the entrance to the archives, Private Tanaka was waiting. He was holding a steaming styrofoam cup. He looked as if he hadn't slept, but his eyes were bright, and he stood straighter than she had ever seen him. He snapped to attention as she approached. "Ma'am," he said, his voice clear and steady. I thought you might like this." Coffee, he held it out, a humble offering. It was more than coffee. It was a tribute. It was a thank you. It was an acknowledgement of the chasm that separated them, and his gratitude for having been allowed, however briefly, to cross it. Anya stopped. She looked at the young soldier, at his earnest, open face. For the first time, a genuine, though minuscule, smile touched the corners of her mouth. It transformed her face, softening the stoic lines for just an instant. "Thank you, Private," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. She took the cup, her fingers brushing his. The warmth of it spread through her hand. Tanaka looked as if he had just been awarded a medal. He held his salute until she had passed through the door into the archive. Anya walked down the cold concrete steps into her subterranean kingdom. The scent of old paper and dust welcomed her like an old friend. Nothing had changed here. The shelves were still tall and silent. The light from the high window was still thin and pale. This was her chosen exile, her penance, her place of quiet. But as she stood there, the warmth of the coffee cup in her hand, it no longer felt like a prison, felt like a choice. The respect she had earned was an external thing, a ripple on the surface of the water. It was pleasant, but it was not the anchor of her existence. Her peace came from within, from the quiet order of her work, from the deliberate act of burying one life so another could breathe. She sat down at her desk, the quiet hum of the servers a familiar, soothing song. The dust motes dancing in the single beam of sunlight looked like a private galaxy, a universe of forgotten things she was tasked to keep. She took a slow sip of the coffee. It was hot and strong. She placed the cup down, her hand steady and sure, and reached for the next box in the stack. It was labeled, Odessa Station Debriefing Files, classified her work, her real work, continued. The respect was earned, the legend was known, but here in the quiet she was just Anya, and for the first time in a very long time that felt like enough.